Welcome back to World Crisis Radio here from New York City. I'm about to address the Left Forum on Saturday, the 31st of May. Some of the themes: the end of history is over. History may have been stalled. It really wasn't, but might have seemed that way to some. History is still alive and well. The end of history was a mirage or a demagogic chimera launched by neocons. The ruling class is nuts in the Anglo-American world because they have built their careers on this. This is their approach, right? They think they're the masters of human destiny. But there's the majority of the world out there, Russia, China, India, and Brazil, and many more, South Africa, who don't share this lunatic view. So the Fukuyama thesis is a dead duck. The Daniel Bell end of ideology thesis is a dead duck. And, of course, the Jessica Matthews power shift nonsense of the late 90s. And what we need now is the new toughness of mind. In other words, it's simply too late in the game. The stakes are too high to have people who go around, they treat politics as where they can where they can experience the subjective satisfactions that they're looking for, and some of them want to be duped. Right? A lot of people who supported Obama were telling that they knew that they were being duped, and that this is what they wanted. They'd rather be duped and go along with Obama than sit on the sidelines. As I was trying to say before, in the 1848 revolutions, every government in continental Europe was overthrown, right? Starting with King Louis Philippe of France, Metternich of Austria, the Pope, everybody, all of them were overthrown. Not the British and not Russia, but everything in between overthrown. What came out of that was what historians have referred to as the new toughness of mind. That romantic blather, utopian slogans, and so forth are not enough, and indeed actually can be extremely damaging to society. A new toughness of mind that was summed up as realpolitik. Now, the person who's associated with this, I mean, you can associate it with quite a few, but Bismarck of Germany, Otto von Bismarck, the Chancellor of Prussia and then of the German Empire. Let me hasten to point out, unless you've really looked at it, you don't know who this is, because the Anglo-American propaganda, because of the world wars and so forth, there's an overlay, there's a thick layer of slanders and so forth about this guy. But think about it, to be the architect of one of the great unified nations of the modern world, and to be a protectionist and dirigist in economics, right? Because remember, the American system of Hamilton and Carey is the same as the German system of Friedrich List. And Friedrich List is actually on both sides of the Atlantic. But Bismarck is associated with some of these ideas. Bismarck, by the way, just to get an idea, some of his ideas are they're quite pervasive. In other words, he influences you more than you know, most likely. For example, if you've ever listened to cable television Sunday morning or broadcast Sunday morning journalism, you will have heard that politics is the art of the possible. Well, politics is the art of the possible. That's Bismarck. That's the guy who said it. And he was also devoted to war avoidance. One of his good sayings is, preventive war is like committing suicide for fear of death. The neocons should put that in their pipes and smoke it. Preventive war is like committing suicide for fear of death. Otto von Bismarck. And the other one is, he was uncanny in his vision of what the First World War would look like. And he says this in 1878. Europe today is a powder keg, and the leaders are like men smoking in an arsenal. A single spark will set off an explosion that will consume us all. I cannot tell you when that explosion will occur, but I can tell you where. Some damned foolish thing in the Balkans will set it off. And that's, 35 years more before World War I actually starts, but he can see it coming. But the one that I think is relevant for our proceedings is, this is something he says after the 1848 revolutions. The great issues of the day are not decided through speeches and majority votes. That was the great error of 1848 and 1849, but through blood and iron. Now, if we could say that the Arab Spring, 2011, 12, 13, and certainly finished by now, if that was the age of utopia and the golden youth and the idea that you could reform a country with internet freedom or, Occupy, where the demands were more money for the Securities and Exchange Commission, or campaign finance reform, or Occupy public space, that's really the stupidest one of all. That's the age of blather. That's the age of nonsense, of anarchism, and really criminally wasting great world historic possibilities. We're now in the age of blood and iron. In other words, it comes down to this. Under conditions of a depression, and I think this we can call this the lessons of the Arab Spring, if you want to. That's in quotes, Arab Spring. In a world depression, the high levels of unemployment and falling standards of living means that every nation state, and indeed civilization itself, are dangerously vulnerable to attack by the CIA and other imperialist agencies. That's what the Arab Spring was. And the golden youth in the public square were simply props, even though they didn't know it. In Tunisia, it was a military coup organized by the CIA among generals using those golden youth as the props, right? But then the CIA had also contracted with the Muslim Brotherhood to come in and take over. That has also ended, and not as tragic quite yet as Libya or Algeria, but still plenty bad. So the world depression means that the nation state is very vulnerable to CIA attack, and that's what the CIA wants to attack. So that's one of the things you have to face. The question I tried to stress before, if you want to have rule of law, if you want to have a democratic republic, if you want to have representative government, that takes a material basis. As Roosevelt said in the Atlantic Charter, needy people cannot be free people. It actually reads, necessitous men cannot be free men. But today, needy people cannot be free people. That's freedom from want. In much of the world, the choice is between authoritarianism and chaos. So which is better, Gaddafi or Hitler? Gaddafi is better. It's clear. Which is better, Sisi or Morsi, who's going to lead the country into a war with Syria and adventurism without end, and bringing in Qaradawi and these other lunatics from Al Jazeera? Sisi is better than Morsi. And again, any national state is better than no state. In other words, any national state, even some of the worst, are better than the kind of chaos that you see in Libya or someplace like this right now. So I would say that would be the realpolitik, tough-minded view, and that when you have a mass strike situation, you can't regard this as a chance to go on vacation and camp in the park and act out every utopian wish, dream, fancy, chimera you've ever had. No, that is irresponsible. Okay, so that I think is one of the things. You've got to use those opportunities to get certain things done in terms of programmatic education organization. And once again, this is Webster Tarpley in New York City for the Left Forum. I also wanted to ask you, which is better, a member of the Nusra Brigade who cannibalizes a human heart on television, or Assad, representing what was a sort of middle-class regime, more or less? I think it's clear, right? The choice was between Assad and chaos. So congratulations to Assad. He has the upper hand in the war, and he's going to be reelected. And I think that's fine. It's not fine. It's the best that can be gotten. Okay? So I would go with that. Now, just remember now, in terms of the European elections, some quick notes. Le Pen and Farage are racist scoundrels, right? They have nothing to contribute. The idea there, as I tried to argue on Press TV this past Tuesday evening, is the bankers want scapegoats. The bankers don't want to be the targets of all the resentment and hatred from the Depression, all the unemployment and privation and so forth. They want a scapegoat. In Britain, it's generally Pakistanis and West Indians. In France, it's Algerians and the others. In Italy, it's Somalians and Moroccans and on and on. So that is the stock and trade of this group. Le Pen and Farage. They're discredited hacks. They've been around for a long time. They're sleazy. They're, intellectually contemptible. Notice, however, Le Pen fortified herself with anti-globalization, in which she wants protectionism and anti-austerity. And I think that's the difference, right? Le Pen, as a racist, xenophobic candidate, Islamophobic, gets you 10 or 15%. But the anti-austerity, when it doesn't look like any of the other really big parties were doing it, this also gave her a big push. Salvini of the Northern League in Italy, again, Farage is not willing to join Le Pen because, of course, he's British, he's xenophobic. But Farage has now made common front with Grillo. And this stresses what I've said the whole time. Grillo is sleazy, proto-fascist, racist, and so forth. The message in Greece is the message of hope. Time for early elections. Elections right now, Samaras out, Tsipras in. And remember, in Greece, there is this majority bonus. So you don't need to get the majority with the coalition. You're going to get if you come in first, you're going to get a big majority bonus. So I think that's extremely important. And again, important that Grillo was defeated, that the good sense of the Italian people was to repudiate this demagogue who was talking about tribunals. He sounded like the Cloven Bundy set, right, that they want to have tribunals to put public officials on trial. And again, notice this entire thing is anti-politician in an era when we need anti-banker. Ultimately, Grillo plays the game of De Benedetti and Soros and the rest of them. He claims to be their opponent, but his main attack is not on them, but on the politicians, right? That the politicians all have to go home and so forth. What else do we have here? Concerning the Veterans Administration and General Shinseki, it's clear the Republicans have hated General Shinseki since he tried to block Bush and the neocons and the Iraq question. But remember, there are now large numbers of returning veterans. The Republicans have never voted enough money for this system, so the bureaucrats respond by these evasive actions. The New York Times, which I have in front of me right now, doctor shortage is cited in delays in VI hospitals. There are not enough doctors. Now, that's the other underlying real economic question of healthcare. You want to have healthcare, you better train 250,000 doctors right now, and 1,000 hospitals, including as many of these VA hospitals as are needed. We have to say a word about Snowden. NBC leaves no doubt Snowden is the darling of Immelt. Immelt loves Snowden. MSNBC devoted an entire evening to Snowden, an evening with Ed Snowden, or Ed Snowden at home. That was Brian Williams going to Moscow with a crew, doing the interview, and then a panel discussion with Pete Williams and Madame Greenspan and all the rest of it. Snowden says that he's from the CIA, he's from the NSA, and he's from the DIA. He was a lecturer for the DIA. He repeats twice, I'm still working for the government, I'm still working for the government. That's right, you are. You are a limited hangout. And he talks as if the principal activity of CIA, DIA, and NSA was to tap phone calls. This, my friends, is not true. What about 9/11? What about the Kennedy assassination? What about the goings-on in the Secret Service? What about Iran-Contra? What about the color revolutions? You get the idea. He has nothing to tell us about all this. Why is it so selective? And, of course, he doesn't even decide. Glenn Greenwald and Poitras do the choosing. We even learn that NBC, through one of his other conduits, has entered into a relationship with Greenwald and therefore with Snowden. You may remember the careers of Noam Chomsky and of Howard Zinn were built on the idea that these two figures were among the most prominent in telling everybody, Daniel Ellsberg is great, Daniel Ellsberg is the real thing, lionize Daniel Ellsberg, make him a leader, this is the big thing. When that was all stuff that Le Monde and Corriere and other papers in Europe, they published all of it. There was nothing new. There was nothing big, nothing new, nothing on the Kennedy assassination, nothing on the Bay of Pigs, right, in terms of staging it. Nothing about the Gulf of Tonkin, none of that. So this is what he's offering. He also does a paranoid trip. He wants you to be really frightened. The CIA knows every keystroke. They know what you're thinking. They know what you're doing. And you can think of all these petty bourgeois with their teeth chattering and they're shuddering. And of course, revolutionary action is not private. Revolutionary action is public. So if you want to do revolutionary action, you better get used to quite a bit of scrutiny. And indeed, that's your goal. So the only thing I would sympathize with Snowden on is when they say, why don't you come back and face justice, face the music, as Kerry of Skull and Bones demands. You look at this poor guy Manning, poor Corporal Manning, and what was done to Corporal Manning. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna go into solitary confinement in a refrigerated room for 2 years as a part of your ridiculous approach, Kerry. So remember, this is also under the Woodrow Wilson Espionage Act, which essentially denies you the possibility to a defense. You can't do that. But that doesn't bother Glenn Greenwald. He's making money hand over fist, right? He is now a limited hangout entrepreneur. Greenwald, Poitras, and others. We've also had this interesting moment where Assange and WikiLeaks have attacked Greenwald because he's sitting on this immense cache of documents, they say, and not sharing them, meaning that he's hoarding them until the price goes up even more. Remember that Greenwald, 30th of December 2013, put out a tweet identifying yours truly as the principal world source of all the stuff about limited hangout. And I plead guilty. I am. And about that and PsyOps, but principally the question of the limited hangout. If you look at Wikipedia, I figure there as an authority. And I would just say the 17th century example is Fra, brother Paolo Sarpi of Venice, and he's the one who wrote that interesting essay, How to Refute Negative Propaganda, Confutar Scritture Malediche, Anti-Venetian Propaganda. And one of the ways, he says, is to have a limited hangout, to say something good about somebody while pretending to say something bad. And that has not changed. And that, of course, goes back much further than Sarpi. It goes back to the ancient world classical civilization. But remember, the most likely interpretation of Snowden is an active duty CIA agent, as he says himself, for the government, but mainly acting to try to cut the NSA down to size and to privatize these functions. Right? That from now on, it shouldn't be the government wiretapping you and so forth, but it should be a private company doing it. So that notion of privatization and